What's up, guys? Welcome to another playoff matchup between the Edmonton Oilers and LA Kings. This is the third consecutive first round meeting between these two teams. So it's definitely going to be a lot of rehashing of what we said last year and the year before that because many of these players are returning from previous matchups between these two teams. The core is still the same, but there's obviously a couple of new faces on both sides of the of each team. So the Edmonton Oilers, as you could see, this is not their lineup. There was a lot of people that were being sat out in terms of precautionary reasons, just resting them for the playoffs. But in terms of what to expect with the Edmonton Oilers, obviously a team with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evander Kane, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Zach Hyman in your top six is arguably one of the best top sixes in the league. Very offensive minded team in the Edmonton Oilers. And in terms of their back end, you have Matthias Ekholm, Evan Bouchard, um, Darnell Nurse as the three pivotal pieces on defense, with obviously having Philip Broberg, Vincent Desharnais, Brett Kulak, Troy Stetcher, and Cody Ceci as the other defensemen available to the Edmonton Oilers as either starters or extra defensemen. So the Edmonton Oilers, offensive minded team, and then taking a look at the Los Angeles Kings, a team that added Pierre Luc Dubois during the offseason. That deal has not worked out in their favor. They had to give up Kupari, Iafolo, and Velarde, who are not playing with the Winnipeg Jets, and two out of the three ex LA players are on their starting lineup. So, yeah, and Pierre-Luc Dubois, who signed a lucrative contract with the LA Kings, playing 4 line minutes, is obviously not something we like to see. But there is other notable names on this team that are very good this season: Kevin Fiala, Anze Kopitar, Adrian Kempe, Trevor Moore, Philip Dano, Victor Arvidsson, who came back from injury recently, Alex Turcotte, who finally found himself making the LA Kings, and Quinton Byfield, who's had a pretty impressive season um, as well. And then in terms of the defense, you have Mikey Anderson, very underrated defenseman, playing alongside Drew Doughty. One of the best LA Kings to ever wear the jersey, and obviously not the defenseman he once was, but still a very solid defenseman. You have Gavrikov, who they added at last year's deadline. He's back with the LA Kings. You have Matt Roy, England, and Jordan Spence. And in terms of the goaltending matchup, well, they have Cam Talbot as their new starting goaltender. Last year they had Corpi Salo, and Edmonton returns with Jeff Skinner as their starter, but Calvin Pickard is their backup as opposed to having um, Campbell, who was their backup goalie last year. So that's a little bit of analysis in terms of who they have on their rosters. But Luca, what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Well, I mean, obviously these teams are very familiar with each other. They've played each other in it's going to be three consecutive playoff series, like you mentioned. But, Edmonton has been able to beat LA before. They've done it the first two times. And so obviously LA is going to try to seek vengeance for the third time running. The thing with the Edmonton Oilers that I think is very interesting is, and also just with these two teams in general, is both teams made coaching changes during the season. The Edmonton Oilers fired Jay Woodcroft after a 3-9-1 record, and the LA Kings fired Todd McClellan after a 23-15-10 record with the Kings. Now, their new head coaches actually came in and did a very good job. The Oilers hired Chris Knobloch, former Erie Otters coach, and was familiar with Connor McDavid. His record was 46-18-5. So he was fantastic behind the bench for the Edmonton Oilers. And Jim Hiller, who was the coach of the LA Kings that replaced Todd McClellan, 21 wins, 12 losses, and one overtime loss. So again, LA getting some good performances. Well, again, as well, getting a good performance from their head coach or the guy behind the bench. What's interesting about these two teams and what separates them, I think, is, obviously the core and the team in general. You look at the Oilers; they're one of the best offensive teams in the league. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, that speaks for themselves. Zach Hyman, who scored 54 goals this season. Evan Bouchard, who's one of the best offensive defensemen in the league. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who had 67 points this year. Maybe not the best, maybe not as good as the year that he had last year, but still 67 points is very, very good and definitely something to write home about. And obviously, those are the main guys that they're going to be relying upon. Obviously, I haven't mentioned Leon Draisaitl, 106 points for him as well. Another solid year for Leon. Um, but the Oilers are a very good offensive team, right? They've got obviously two of the best players in the game, and they've got a lot of interesting players as well. Evander Kane didn't really play the best season for him. Kind of dropped off towards the end of the season, but still 24 goals for him. We know he can get the odd big goal here and there. Warren Foegele, who had 41 points in 82 games, 20 goals. He's going to be a guy that they're going to rely upon for depth scoring. And there is another guy that they brought in at the trade deadline, Adam Henrique, who had 9 points in 22 games for the Oilers. Maybe didn't fit in as best as they thought he would, but he's a guy who's got experience. He's a guy who did really well when he was in Anaheim. I think they're going to be looking for a little bit more out of him in these playoffs. And obviously, another one that actually played really well and could be a good depth piece for them is Corey Perry. And that's one of the things that I think we've talked about with the Oilers in years past, is that this was a team that lacked depth. This was a team that when they got into the playoffs, you were like, okay, apart from McDavid and Draisaitl, who's going to get the goals for them? And I feel like this year, more than ever, I think one of the biggest things that Ken Holland did is he went out and he addressed, some big needs. He went out and he addressed some depth, right? And I think that that's very important for the Oilers because, for a team that's, let's say, one of the best offensive teams in the league, just in terms of the players that they have, it's very good to rely on a guy like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, but you also need to make sure that in playoffs that you have guys that have won Stanley Cups and have been in positions before where they can win a Stanley Cup. And in Corey Perry's case, this is a guy that won a cup with the Ducks and has made it to multiple Stanley Cup finals with the Dallas Stars and obviously with the Tampa Bay Lightning as well. And is now getting an opportunity. And he also did it with the Montreal Canadiens in 2021. So this is a guy that's got great playoff experience. He knows what it takes to win. And you've got a guy like Adam Henrique, who's played a lot of veteran NHL games. Like, those are two big guys and big acquisitions for the Edmonton Oilers that they made during the trade deadline that can get them into a very good position. And then, not only that, you look at the rest of their team. Like I said, even like guys like Ryan McLeod, who had 30 points this year. Guys like Sam Gagner, who only played 28 games, had 10 points. Like, these are all fringe guys that can be also very good difference makers for them. So I think the Oilers, very impressed with them in terms of the depth that they added, and I think that makes them a better team than they were a couple of years ago, and even last year. The biggest question mark, I think, for the Oilers is going to be in net. Now, I know Stuart Skinner, had a really rough start to the year, and there was a lot of question marks about whether or not he was going to be able to take over the starting job in Edmonton, and whether or not he was even a starting goaltender. He's played some good hockey this year. I think he's had rough moments at times. I think a lot of his numbers are reflective on the beginning of the season and not necessarily what he's done since. But 36 wins, 16 losses, 5 overtime losses, 2 shutouts, 905 save percentage, and a 262 goals against average. And then they have Calvin Pickard, who played 23 games, 12 wins, 7 losses, 1 overtime loss, and a 909 save percentage with 1 shutout. So, obviously they were able to get good goaltending down the stretch after what happened at the beginning of the season. But this is a team that's played very good hockey since Chris Knobloch came in. He's brought a sustainable defensive core for them in the sense that he's made them play some very good defense. He's found their scoring touch a little bit more. So I think that the Oilers are in a very good position going into these playoffs. The only concern that I would have with this team is 2 things. One is the goaltending. Is Stuart Skinner going to be able to help this team and sustain this team for potentially a deep playoff run, in the sense that if they get past LA, and will they be able to go past the second, third, and fourth rounds? And the other question mark that I have with this team that I'm very, very concerned about is they've lost 4 out of the last 5 going into the playoffs. So they're not necessarily on the hottest run right now. And that could be a big problem for them if they do end up struggling in the playoffs. The last thing I want to mention about the Oilers before we move on to LA is, they're one of the best power plays in the league at 26.14%, and their penalty kill is just above league average at 79.53. So, like I said, again, a team that can score a lot of goals, and definitely on the power play they can make you pay, but not necessarily the best penalty killing team in the league. Looking at the LA Kings, this is a very interesting situation. I'm under the impression that I feel like this team isn't as good as people think they are. And I'm going to give you my reasoning as to why. 19th in the league in goals forward, third in the league in goals against, which is a very important stat. PK percentage 84.92%, power play percentage 22.3. So, again, very good power play and PK. And obviously, they got some big productions from guys like Adrian Kempe, Kevin Fiala, Anze Kopitar, who were big parts of their team. Trevor Moore scored 31 goals, had 57 points. Quinton Byfield had a very good season for a guy who was starting to find his groove. But this is a team that I find is not necessarily that good in terms of just their team on paper. And I just don't think I think they've overachieved this season, but at the same time, I also don't think they're going to go very far in these playoffs. The reason being is I'm not too high on their goaltending. And I know they've had a good season. I know Cam Talbot, 27 wins, 20 losses, 6 overtime losses, 913 save percentage, 3 shutouts. And David Riddick, 13 wins, 6 losses, 3 overtime losses, 921, also 3 shutouts. But my concern with LA is they're a very good defensive team. They were third in the league in goals against. So clearly they had very good goaltending. They played very good defensively. They have a lot of guys that are good defensively as well, which helps, you know, their core. The issue with me is I look at this team and there's nothing really that wows me. Like, yes, the first line is very good. Fiala can change a game for you. Kempe can change a game for you. Kopitar can change a game for you. They have some young guys. But I just think that when you're coming up against a team like Edmonton, who they've already lost to twice before, and Edmonton knows how to beat them, it's going to be a tough task. And for me, I think the biggest thing in these playoffs, and we've talked about it in every single episode, is goaltending. And I just feel like with Cam Talbot and even with David Riddick to some extent, I just feel like in a 7-game series against the Edmonton Oilers, I don't know if you're going to necessarily get the best version of these guys. You got them during the regular season, which is great, and it's fantastic, and it's great. But are they going to be able to do it in the playoffs? And that is, I think, the biggest question mark with the LA Kings is that. Now, am I saying that it's not impossible they're going to be the Oilers? No, I mean, it's happened. We definitely could see a situation where the LA Kings can win. I think if Pierre-Luc Dubois can play better than he did in the regular season, I think if Philippe Danault can be the same playoff guy that he was when he was with the Canadiens and even last year with the LA Kings, I think there's definitely a chance. But I also think to some extent that I think the Oilers offense is going to be a little bit too much. And I think that if the Oilers can get, even 3-4 goals past the LA Kings in any of, the games, I think they're going to win. Like I don't think the Kings, have enough on their team to necessarily beat the Edmonton Oilers. And I just think from a depth perspective and an offensive perspective, I think the Oilers are much better. And for that reason, I think they're going to win this series. Probably in 6 games is what I would say.
So yeah, I agree with many of the points that you mentioned. LA was better last year on paper, and also in terms of how they played overall as a team, and the year before that as well. Those two LA teams, in my opinion, were a lot stronger. Not having Sean Dursey there obviously doesn't help. That hurts the team. Pierre-Luc Dubois being paid $8.5 million until 2030, 31, and only had a 40 point campaign. Very underwhelming. The fact that he's even playing on the fourth line. This is a guy that was signed to be the successor to Philip Danault and Anze Kopitar, because we know they're not getting any younger, and Dubois is way younger, and very underwhelming year. And they traded a lot for him, and like you said, if Dubois is not a factor in this series, LA is losing 100%. Philip Danault, it's twice now that he's faced up against the likes of McDavid and Draisaitl at the faceoff circle and has lost. They're bringing in Dubois to help out Dano and Kopitar as well. And I just don't think Dubois is in this time as of right now that he's just not there in terms of what they expect from him. And there's been a lot of comments from their previous coach and their current coach voicing their displeasure with Dubois' work ethic. And even in the past with John Tortorella in his time with the Columbus Blue Jackets and also with the Winnipeg Jets with Rick Bowness, displeasure about how he composes himself as a player in the locker room and with the rest of the players. And he just is essentially a cancer, unfortunately. And it seems like wherever he goes, he brings down his team. And I'm not saying that's the only reason why LA has taken a step back. Obviously, I would say that Cam Talbot started off very hot, but then after the All Star break, started to get exposed and started to show the type of goalie that he actually is. And kudos and credit to Cam Talbot for having a very good start, but you need consistent goaltending, and he slipped, and it led to the firing of their coach, and they hired another coach and had a whole new coaching staff, which honestly um, has helped the team, but has it really pushed the narrative for them to be so much better to beat the likes of a team as the Edmonton Oilers? I don't really think so. You look at the Edmonton Oilers' firepower in terms of what they have as options, you look at their depth, like this team is poised for a playoff run, like a deep playoff run to like the Stanley Cup finals. Like they have experience in Adam Henrique and Corey Perry, and also an Ekholm as well. But even guys like McDavid, Draisaitl, and Hopkins, they're no strangers to the playoffs as well. They've been in the playoffs the last couple of years. The Edmonton Oilers, you know, um, Evan Bouchard continues to elevate his game. You have Ryan McLeod who elevated his game this year. Warren Fogle, who I thought had a very good campaign, and you just look at their plus and minuses, most of the team, including their depth players, are in the plus margin. And that shows how much of a difference the coaching change has made. So if I have to compare the coaching change between the Edmonton Oilers and the LA Kings, well, Edmonton was near the bottom of the league and finished uh, as one of the top 10 teams in the league in the standings this year and managed to finish second in their division. So that's very impressive. And they always had the team on paper to get it done. But they were mentally broken and they needed things to change, and that's exactly what happened. And their new coach got the best out of them. Obviously, Evander Kane had a down year, but it's fine. Everyone else was able to elevate their game. And Zach Hyman, 54 goal campaign, fantastic. Like so even though there's some players that did take a step back in terms of their points, there's other players who also elevated their game in terms of goals scored, in terms of their plus minus, in terms of their defensive game as a whole. I think they're playing a better defensive structure now than they did before. And I think they're not going to be exposed as much as they were in the past. And now with Skinner, obviously not the best starting goaltender in the league, but definitely did find consistency to his game. And Calvin Pickard, a journeyman in the league, solidifies himself as the Edmonton Oilers' backup. Surpassing Campbell. They could have gone with another option and try to trade for a backup goalie or maybe a starter, and they didn't. They stuck with these two guys, and look how far they were able to go from the bottom of the barrel to in the top 10. So it's very impressive of what they did in the turnaround. Obviously, there's been some letdowns like Connor Brown, who they signed as a UFA, hasn't really panned out. But you have guys like Sam Gagner, who also has experience as well. You have Derek Ryan, you have Brett Kulak that you could add to the mix as well. You have a young player in Dylan Holloway who hasn't found consistency to his game, but like if guys go down in the bottom six, they have options, and their top six is solidified as well. So like they have a lot of interchangeable plate pieces, a lot of Swiss Army knives, and that is the beauty of deep playoff teams. And this is why they find success in the playoffs because they have a lot of players at their disposal that they could use. If
Yeah.
someone has a bad game, they could swap out a player that will give the same amount of production or a little bit more of a boost,
Yeah.
depending on the opponent, right? So
For sure.
for me, the Edmonton Oilers, I believe they will win in 5 games. I
Oh,
just see the LA Kings just being a team, unfortunately, that will not be able to contain the Edmonton Oilers. And sure, not the greatest goaltending matchup between the two, but I do believe Skinner is the better goaltender compared to Cam Talbot. And just looking at the LA Kings this year, the fact that they have one, two, three defensemen in their top 10 in points over their depth forwards is a problem, in my opinion. The fact that their defense has to elevate their offensive game to help out their team win games, and whereas the forwards are not getting the job done in terms of offensive production, is definitely a problem.
I
Kevin, yeah, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things too that that you brought up, and it's a good point, is the fact that LA does lack their depth. I think obviously the loss of Victor Arvidsson too, at times this season, played a factor for LA because Arvidsson's a really good scorer, and I think he could be a very good difference maker for the Kings if he was available, early on in the year, and if he wasn't always injured as well. I mean, the guy had 15 points in 18 games, when he did play. So there is definitely some expectation for Arvidsson to come in and be a difference maker, and I think that's going to help them a lot. But I look at the rest of this team, and even just from a standpoint of the LA Kings, I mean, look, their top six is really good. Obviously, we talked about how good Kempe, Fiala, Kopitar was. Trevor Moore, Quinton Byfield, Philip Danault, and even to some extent Victor Arvidsson. But I think, like we mentioned before, after Pierre-Luc Dubois, like it falls off a little bit in terms of their depth. And I feel like, you know, it's like we mentioned before, it needs to be a situation where Pierre-Luc Dubois needs to be better. Because I feel like if the LA Kings want any chance at winning this, and I know I said it before, but yes, they're going to get production from their top guys, and I think we all know that every team in the playoffs is going to rely on their top guys. But if they can get a Pierre-Luc Dubois version of what he was in Winnipeg, and a 65, 70 point guy who could come into the playoffs and be a difference maker for the LA Kings, if that's what he can finally become and really elevate his game, I think the Kings are in a better position than some people might think. The other thing too, though, is this is another year for the Edmonton Oilers to kind of prove that they're as good as the top guys. And what I mean by that is they're trying to compete for a Stanley Cup. They're trying to win a Stanley Cup. I think for the LA Kings, yes, there's ambitions to win a Stanley Cup, but I don't think they're there yet in terms of being a contender. Right. So I think for them, it's all about gaining playoff experience and trying to see how far they can go. And, some extent, yeah, try to beat the Oilers and see, what your ceiling is for the playoffs. But for the Oilers, like, they're contenders, right? Like, they're perennial contenders. They've got Connor McDavid, they got Leon Draisaitl. Like, McDavid's 27, Draisaitl's 28. They're in the prime of their careers. Like, this is now the time that you need to go and chase a cup and try to win it. And I just feel like there's more motivation than ever now for the Oilers to finally do it and actually go and be competitive. And in order for them to do so, they kind of got, I'm not saying that they have to go and beat LA easily, but they can't struggle against the Kings. They have to pretty much settle this series, in 5 or 6 games, even in 4 games if they can, and just kind of cement themselves into the second round so that they're better off suited when they go up against, let's say, whether it's a Vancouver or a Dallas or a Colorado, whatever the outcome ends up bringing in for Edmonton, they got to be in a better position. And I do think that to some extent, this is like Edmonton is in desperate need of getting over the hump and finally being able to get to a cup final, because you need to do it with Connor McDavid, because at some point, like, I know McDavid, is still young enough in the sense where he's still got time, but like, dude needs to win a cup and he deserves one. And I feel like, they just need to have every opportunity they can. So let's see.
Yeah, and for me, like, it really comes down to the goaltending and the bottom six forwards, because at least top six is not bad. If Kevin Fiala or Quinton Byfield slot into the top six, you know, they could compete with the Edmonton Oilers. And if you look at their power play, they don't have a bad power play. They're 11th. They're 22.6, and their defense is, they don't even have a bad defensive core. They actually have a very underrated defensive core, and that's showing that they're able to contribute offensively, but also defensively. It's the goaltending that's the problem. And if you look
Yeah.
at their penalty kill, the LA Kings actually have the second best penalty kill in the league with 84.6. So they have good special teams. But in all, in terms of scoring goals, they're 16. The Edmonton Oilers are first.
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to. Like 5v5 hockey. Because both these teams are pretty strong in terms of the special teams. It comes down to 5v5 hockey. It comes down to the goaltending in the bottom six. And I believe until Dubois does not pick up his game, that and also the other guys that are listed here, I don't think LA is going to be able to compete against the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton has bottom six forwards now that are established, experienced, that are
Mm.
productive defensively
Yeah.
and offensively. They have easily the best top six, in my opinion, in the league. Okay. They have good defensive pairings that are mixed with both defensive defensemen and offensive offensemen. And they have an average goaltending duo that could keep them in games because of how good their defense and offense have become this year, right? But in terms of the LA Kings, there's only so much your defense can do to bail out Cam Talbot. And if Cam Talbot is not going to be the solution and you're going to David Riddick, then the series is over.
I honestly feel like again, I know I'm saying this with the realization that their goaltending wasn't the problem, but I genuinely feel like LA should have went out and got a goalie during the trade deadline. And,
They almost got
and
Linus Allmark, which
I
he
know,
rejected a
but
trade.
the reason I'm saying that, and it's not a disrespect to David Riddick or to Cam Talbot, is if you get yourself a solidified starting goaltender, right? We're talking a Jacob Markstrom, Saros was available at some point during the season, a Linus Olmark, even to some extent a Jake Allen, right?
He did pretty
Like,
well in New Jersey.
like I think it puts yourself in a better position, and I think it puts yourself in a better, let's say, conversation. Because let's say the Olmark deal goes through, which I know it's not necessarily LA's fault, but if they end up acquiring Linus Olmark, I think we're having a different conversation because I think we're talking about a team that's got one of the best goaltenders in the league in Linus Olmark, and a Vezina winner last year, and a guy who can steal you a playoff series, and with a very good decor and decent amount of offensive core, I think we have a different conversation. But I do think that the biggest difference in this is that I know Stuart Skinner is nothing to write home about in the sense that he's, like Chris said, he's not one of the best goalies in the league, but he's definitely pretty good. And I would rather, if, in a 7-game series, if you had to ask me who would you rather have in net, I'd be picking towards Stuart Skinner anyways because I just believe in him a little bit more. That's where I think the biggest issue comes in with LA is if they would have went and a little just solidified their goaltending a little bit more to get a guy like Jake Allen, right? And or even like I said, a Jacob Markstrom, that would have been a big fish. I think that would have been huge for them. I
Yeah,
think that would have put them over the top. The, I
or at
think the
least
fact
force
that they
7 games.
right. I feel like the reason they didn't do that is because maybe they didn't believe that they were contenders, which is fine. That's okay. But I just think that that could be the main reason as to why they don't beat the Oilers. That's me personally.
I mean, look, the LA Kings at one point were one of the top teams in the league at the start of the season, and they
Right.
fell off big time, which led to the firing of their coach and
Yeah.
and changing the whole coaching staff. So, I mean, look, they were this close to
I
being
agree.
out, and a lot. And but again, like there's similarities with both Edmonton and LA. There was coaching changes that were made that, to a certain degree, saved LA's season and literally turned everything around for Edmonton. And also, in terms of their goaltending situation, not having the most consistent goaltending, but both these teams prevailed and managed to clinch a playoff spot. But one of them is clearly better than the other. And if you look at the turnaround of the Edmonton Oilers compared to the LA Kings, LA went from good to crap to stabilizing to Edmonton going from horrible and expectations were not being met to wow, what a turnaround. Top 10
Yeah.
team in the league. So Edmonton is on a high right now. They have the better pieces, they have the better overall team. And yeah, it just comes down to that. They're living in the moment, and when you have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, the two best players in the league, in my opinion, or the two best centermen in the league offensively, um, that they could easily carry the team. And
Yeah,
now that they
I
have
agree.
depth and experience, wow, it's just gonna like the finals is basically what a lot of people are expecting from this team. And I think if they don't win the cup this year, it's a missed opportunity, because this is by far the best Edmonton Oilers team on paper that they've had since making the playoffs and having this core intact. And it
I
would be a
agree.
shame to piss it away, essentially, especially when you're facing a weaker team in LA. But guys, we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Who wins, the LA Kings or the Edmonton Oilers? If we sound like we were, a little bit more biased towards the Edmonton Oilers, at the end of the day, this is our opinion. This is our analysis. We'd like to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section below. You know, just make sure to state your reasons why you chose either LA or Edmonton. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and we have one more video left for you guys, which is the matchup between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Dallas Stars to conclude our predictions for the first round of the playoffs, which will be continued once the first round is done. We'll continue to the second round. But we hope that you guys enjoy this series as well as the other series and our other coverage videos and predictions on the other matchups. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Young Guns podcast.